Hello and welcome to Pet Hair Push Pins Packing Peanuts using reclaimed material with Tricia Wasney, presented by the Manitoba Craft Council. Please give a warm welcome to Tricia in the live chat. The Manitoba Craft Council was founded in 1978 as Manitoba's only not-for-profit arts organization dedicated exclusively to contemporary craft. The Manitoba Craft Council is located in Winnipeg within Treaty 1 territory, the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Innu Cree, Oji-Cree, Dene, Dakota, and is the birthplace of the Métis Nation and at the heart of the Métis Nation homeland. The purpose of the MCC is to promote, develop, and advocate for contemporary craft and its makers in Manitoba. For over 40 years, the organization has worked to ensure that contemporary craft and the artists who produce it are supported, recognized, and celebrated for their contribution to the cultural and economic life in Manitoba. In these challenging times, the Manitoba Craft Council is proud to create programming to help artists, craftspeople, and other makers adapt with the rapid and continuing changes in our community. For more information about becoming a member of the Manitoba Craft Council, please check out our website in the description. Scouring thrift stores, shelves, and recycling bins, Tricia Wasney's illustrated talk explores the treasures to be found in reclaimed, recycled, and sustainable materials. Through her narrative jewelry and showing work of fellow artists, Tricia brings attention to the climate crisis while demonstrating the whimsical possibilities of using otherwise throwaway materials. Tricia Wasney's work is informed by landscape, scientific research, and forgotten histories. Her studies in landscape architecture, literature, and film impact her work, which investigates through narrative jewelry and craft-based practices, referencing historical methods and employing diverse materials and techniques. More and more, she is incorporating recycled, thrifted, and otherwise waste materials into her work. Tricia has participated in artist residencies in Belfast, Northern Ireland, Churchill, Manitoba, and Riding Mountain National Park. Her work has been exhibited at the C2 Centre for Craft, the Buhler Gallery, and the Alberta Craft Council, with upcoming shows at the School of Art at the University of Manitoba and Milan Jewellery Week in Milan, Italy. She has received numerous grants for her artwork from the Winnipeg Arts Council and the Manitoba Arts Council and the Canada Council for the Arts. Please type any questions you may have during the chat during Tricia's talk, and they'll be answered at the Q&A after the presentation. And now I'll give it over to Tricia.
Thank you. Thank you all for joining me tonight, and thank you to the Manitoba Craft Council and Katrina for allowing me to present this talk. I want to echo the acknowledgement of living and working on traditional Indigenous lands and give humble thanks for that. Like this guy, I like to reuse things, and also like this guy, I probably do 1,000 other things wrong. But more and more, I am incorporating found, thrifted, recycled, and otherwise waste materials into my artwork. I come by this honestly. This is a picture of my beautiful parents, who are sadly no longer with us. They really taught me to reuse and compost and mend and make do. This was a result of going through the Great Depression. There was always a compost pile near our garden, so it was natural for me to do that in my own yards. My mom made a lot of our clothes and patched and repatched my dad's work clothes. My mom always washed out plastic bags, and I still do that. In my younger years, people made fun of me for doing so, but now, of course, the harm of plastic is known, and we're all taking that into consideration. Here's me in my natural environment, caught foraging for a little bit of garbage on the street. This is another way I gather materials that may have escaped their original owners. This is the result of my find last week, some silk vines and some plastic leaves that will eventually find its way into my work. And speaking of plants, I use a lot of organic material in my work as well. This is part of a series I created using seed pods from my garden and bones that I found. The reason it is called Let Go is I imagine people wearing these brooches and dispersing seeds of prairie plants like other animals and birds do. This came about after a really great workshop at the herbarium at the University of Manitoba. It's a fantastic place to see collected plant specimens. This is a black-eyed Susan, and this is a giant hyssop. This is a piece I made from living plants, obviously an ephemeral one, and it was created for the Makers Challenge that the Manitoba Craft Council cleverly devised during the pandemic lockdown. I used a safety pin I found in my house and catkins and dogwood twigs from my yard. This is made from items from my garden as well. Dogwood twigs set into silver cups that I constructed in my studio. I use as much recycled sterling silver as I can in my work. It's not always possible to find, sadly, but I also have plans to use more scrap silver and gold, which I'll talk about a bit more later. I want to point out too that even the neon paint on the twigs was purchased at Goodwill. Also purchased from Goodwill were these silk flower petals, and I created these earrings with caps made from silver that I had originally carved from wax and then had cast. And then to that I added some rubber beads that I had in my studio. And this is another version in a different color. This is a series of work called An Exquisite Balance. It was a result of a really wonderful project that I was part of in 2020, 2021, where 5 artists collaborated with 5 neuroscientists, an opportunity created by the Neuroscience Network in Manitoba and Mentoring Artists for Women's Art, known as MAWA. For this project, I worked with a neuroscientist whose research was around synapses, and he talked about the exquisite balance that is required in the brain between excitatory and inhibitory behavior. And this exquisite balance is required for healthy brain activity. Following his talk, we had a talk by a woman in neuroscience, and her talk was about women in neuroscience and the kind of gender gap that existed there. So after hearing from the scientists, I thought about an exquisite balance as not only brain activity but also gender balance. So what I did in this case, I used vintage collars, and they represent historical women in neuroscience. And each of the collars is dedicated to a particular scientist, the embroidered images reflecting the kind of research they conducted. The collars are vintage, and I would say 99% of the thread is from my mom's stash, as well as the beads, which have been handed down to me or salvaged from old jewelry that I've taken apart. The other part of this project was the use of used lab coats. They were donated by women and those identifying as women from a neuroscience lab in Winnipeg. With these, I wanted to show the work of contemporary women scientists. I really wanted to use used coats because it was important for me to show the hard work that these women do. Many of the coats were covered in stains that clearly show that these are the uniforms women wear to work in. They protect themselves from the possibly harmful agents they may work with, and vice versa. This particular coat is special as it represents the research of Dr. Sari Hanala, who obtained the coats for me. I asked her to send me some of her research, and she sent me a paper that she said she was most proud of, complete with diagrams. I used her diagrams to recreate the research in beads and embroidery, often using stains, the existing stains on the coats, as the nuclei for the neurons. I also made a lapel pin in the form of neuron that you can see on the one of the lapels. It's another image of neuron activity with a pendant, and the pendant itself looks like neuron activity as well, and it has a little, just a little agate bead that I set into it. Here are the pieces on display at the Buhler Gallery in 2021. I'm really happy that this work has found another venue, and 2 of the lab coats and 3 of the collars are now on display in Alberta at the Craft Council Gallery in Edmonton. And they'll be traveling to Calgary in August as part of an exhibition entitled Craft and Science. I just want to point out the coat on the left side of the screen and show you a close-up. This is a little close-up of this pendant in progress. All the materials here were recycled, including the felt, my mom's needle and thread, and the aluminum that I applied is from a large roll of printed aluminum sheet that my dad salvaged probably, oh, I don't know, probably 50 years ago. My dad was a real junk collector as well. As a farmer, he always knew that he'd find a use for something eventually. So I'm using this aluminum a lot now in my work. On one side of the aluminum are Hilroy scribblers, images of Hilroy scribblers. So I suppose they were used in some sort of lithograph or printing process. I've been lugging around this aluminum for many years, and now I'm finding all kinds of uses for it in my studio. And the scissors, those beautiful scissors there, were given to me recently by my partner's mom, and they're special to me as well. My work is often made from reclaimed materials, but it also sometimes directly addresses climate change and its content. This is a set of cutlery I made based on Michael Pollan's writing and his famous quote, "Eat food, not a lot, mostly plants." I made the cutlery from recycled silver and felted the vegetables from wool roving. The placemat is cotton fabric from my mom's stash, and I sewed it on I embroidered it on the machine that my mom gave me. It was secondhand when she gave it to me. She had this little habit of buying secondhand sewing machines and giving them to her kids and then later to her grandkids. Um, and she gave this to me when I moved out on my own when I was 19. Also, directly about the impact of climate change, this work is called Bird Habitat Loss, 1970 to 2017. The circles that you see are based on infographics from the journal Science, and they depict bird population decline between 1970 and 2017 in the North American boreal forest, which are the gray and white circles, and the grasslands, which are the purple and orange circles. I made the circles from thrifted wool sweaters that I then felted. This is a project in progress right now about extinct birds. As we know, extinction is largely caused by negative human interaction. We are a species to be wondered about sometimes, the harm that we do. Anyway, I'm drawing extinct birds, recording their name, where they occurred, and when they became extinct. The drawings, I'll just go back. The drawings are made on receipt paper that I bought secondhand, and they will be rolled into these capsules. And the capsules are made from the recycled aluminum from my dad that I spoke about earlier. The green bird band are the plastic bird bands are the only new items that I purchased for this project. The aluminum holders are meant to recall the capsules carried by the carrier pigeon, probably one of the most famous extinct birds. So this isn't a jewelry project, it will become a mobile. I purchased this 1940-ish chandelier at the Old House Revival Company. And what I will do is hang 150 of the capsules from the chandelier. There are approximately 150 species of birds that have become extinct since people began recording this kind of thing. But the numbers vary greatly. But I chose the number 150 as a target for the number that I'll do. The capsules will hang from 1950s watch chains that I purchased at a junk store. I was really glad to find these watch chains as the element of time and the idea of obsolescence is important to my project. In addition to plants, I like to use local materials as much as I can. This piece is part of a larger project that will be shown in an exhibition curated by Abby Auld at the School of Art Gallery at the University of Manitoba beginning in August of this year. It's a project that represents the Gillis quarries in Garson, Manitoba. This is where Tyndallstone comes from, the famous Tyndallstone that we're known for. Fun fact, The stone actually comes from Garson, but from what I understand, where they shipped it from, the boxes were labeled Tyndall, and that's how it came to be known as Tyndall stone. Although Abby can probably correct me on, on that fact. I'm creating jewelry pieces that will be inset in Tyndall stone base maps of the quarry, and the pieces are made of Tyndall stone or from materials I found on the quarry site. In this case, the rusted steel is from the bands that wrap the Tyndall stone for transport, and I've made a pendant from that, hanging from a handmade silver chain. This is a stick pin I made from a tiny fossil I chiseled out of a larger piece of stone. And next here is a brooch that I made from that same steel, from silver wire, and a clasp that I created in the studio, and some silver beads that I had in the studio. This is another piece from the quarry project. I'm calling this entire project Millions and Millions. And the reason for the name is I wanted the project to reflect a few things. The stone is over 450 million years old. Millions of hands have worked on it over the years to excavate it, and millions of liters of water now fill the holes created from extricating the stone. And I wanted to play with the idea of jewelry made from modest materials that doesn't cost millions of dollars. This piece is meaningful to me because my dad actually worked at the quarry when he was a teenager. And the baler twine is something I salvaged from the farm and that my dad once used. The rest is made from sterling silver and brass. And if you notice there's these little tiny silver caps that look like beads between the brass caps and the brass wire. They're actually from the silver part from that connects the brush to the handle from some cheap paintbrushes that I found at a secondhand store. And I think I used the brushes with some glue, so the tops weren't good anymore, and I just thought the silver part was interesting, and I incorporated them into the neck piece. These are earrings also made from wood fragments that I found on the quarry site. This is an interesting current project from New York. I'm just going to read a description from their website. The Jewellery Edit is hosting radical jewelry makeover and ethical metalsmiths to transform unwanted jewelry into new pieces that will raise awareness for better practices in production and design, and the need for a more transparent supply chain. Together, they are drawing attention to the social and environmental impacts of mining and jewelry production through education, collaboration, and action. Materials used in jewelry production are often sourced from sacred lands and disputed territories in some of the poorest countries in the world. This sourcing can come at a great social and environmental cost. We will be hosting educational programming to encourage consumers to consider the social and environmental impact of mining and jewelry and reconsider the results of our consumption. Lorraine West was one of the jewelers who participated in the Jewellery Edit. She made this ring from scrap silver chain that she melted down. I was so fortunate to meet Lorraine when I went to New York Jewelry Week in 2019. She gave a small group of us a tour of the jewelry district, and it was so much fun because she basically was going about her errands, and so she took us into places you'd never see as someone who wasn't familiar with the casting places and the polishing places and the gemstone buyers and sellers. It was really fascinating. Her work has really exploded in the last couple of years, and now I see people like Beyonce and Lizzo are wearing her designs on the red carpet at the Met Gala and in magazine spreads. And I'm just really grateful that I met Lorraine, and we still do keep in touch, although she's gotten a bit busy, shall we say. Maybe here I'll just address why I work with jewelry. I find it a very rich and evocative art form. I find that it's capable of telling stories in ways that, well, I guess there's lots of ways to tell stories, but I really love the relatively small form and the ability to work with different kinds of materials. Jewelry, I find, is both the most private and the most public of art forms, and even the most decorative of it indicates much about the wearer. We just have to think about engagement rings or grad rings or team rings, Victorian morning jewelry. There's all kinds of things that really tell us a lot about who is wearing it and give actually pretty deep stories in a way that people don't maybe recognize right off the bat. Narrative jewelry takes that even further and attempts to explore wider issues. Jeweler Jack Cunningham describes it this way: narrative jewelry are small objects that have the potential to speak of large issues, make bold statements, and question accepted values. Like a piece of poetry, this is the art of condensing, of distilling thoughts and ideas into a reduced visual representation. This is work by a Korean artist, and she creates these incredible pieces from recycled aluminum drink cans. Excuse me, this is a pin. And these are earrings. The color and the form are really remarkable. From an interview with Han, the author who interviewed Han wrote, talk about sustainability. Han takes a disposable product as one of the main contributors to environmental pollution and makes something beautiful. This neck piece by Daniel Kruger is a huge favorite of mine. Kruger was born in South Africa and is now based in Berlin. His work is not all about using recycled materials, but he does incorporate a lot of historical ideas and references in his work. But I just love these pieces that are made from recycled items. And this is a work by Abby E. Howard, who my friend Blair made me aware of on Instagram recently. And on Instagram, Howard can be found under the name Mama Jewellery. She's located in Philadelphia and New York City. I just absolutely love these bread tab necklaces. I I look at those tabs all the time, and now I'm so sad that she thought of this idea before I did. I think they're really, really interesting. And these earrings made from broken sleds are just so funny and colorful. I really love them. So my new series of work that's focusing entirely on reclaimed materials, I'm calling Post. And I just want to thank the Manitoba Arts Council for their support of this project. I just received an ADAPT grant for this project. Post refers to post-consumer and post-lockdown. As we all know, through the first confusing and terrifying months of the pandemic, very few of us were going anywhere, and many of us were shopping online, which resulted in a lot of packing material. I save packing material anyway, but I love the idea of starting to use that material in my work. Also, the Post sort of logo that I'm showing you here, I made that from monogram jewelry that I've been collecting from thrift stores. I hunt for it all the time. So I'll just put it out there. If anybody has any sources, please, you can message me. I would love to have more letters than I need to actually play with words through the monogram jewelry. So there was a serendipitous moment where I was looking at my packing material and found the work of this incredible artist and costume designer who creates portraits seemingly from another era, but using modern materials. And you can see on her head, the veil is made from packing foam. And on her finger is the pull lid from a can that she wears as a ring. The artist says this about her work: the idea of making something out of nothing changes our look on reality. A piece of plastic with text printed on it, used for packing a coffee machine or television, can resemble a piece of silk. And the lid of a can of tomato puree can look like a ring. In this work, the halo above the woman's head, her necklace, and her headband all feature packing peanuts, one of my favorite materials. So my pieces, these packing foam pieces, are really inspired by Suzanne Youngman's. These earrings are made from packing foam. The ruffle ring is also made from packing foam and oxidized silver that I made all the components in my studio. And remember that chandelier I showed you earlier? Well, I was super excited to find that chandelier, but I was almost excited when they packed it in a large bag full of a variety of packing peanuts. You can see some of them here on a table in my studio. I started playing with them to see how I could put them together. So I made this piece, which I called Blossoms, from push pins and packing peanuts, and a pair of earrings from the beautiful yellowy green packing peanuts. And this one is from packing peanuts again, and using Mason's line cord, this beautiful neon cord that I found at Home Hardware and have been using in a lot of my pieces. Here's the toothsome necklace modeled by the lovely Susie Smith, who is my studio neighbor. I tend to call on her to model my pieces now and then because she's just next door. So thanks so much for that, Susie. Here's a ring made from packing material, pearls, and a repurposed ring I made a few years ago. And this is my version of a monogram pendant using an S-shaped packing peanut, and again, that lovely Mason's cord. This choker I made from a metal mesh sleeve from a wine bottle, and I strung tiny styrofoam balls on it to represent pearls. And the ribbon, that ribbon comes from, you know, when you buy a new garment and it has those annoying ribbons that hang it on the hanger. I always cut them off, and I always save them. And so I use that ribbon. I use that ribbon for this piece. I have my family saving things for me now too, so I'm ending up with lots of interesting bits and pieces. Garland is made from anti-static bags that electronics come in. They're quite thick plastic, and they're beautiful silvery blue color. They were going to be thrown out at an office of a friend of mine, but he saved them for me. I use kid scissors, kind of like pinking shears, to cut the circles. That's another thing I collect at secondhand stores are those scissors, and I have many pairs with different designs in the blades. I strung the circles on this cotton cord, and the gold rhinestone beads are vintage little beads from my stash. This is where the pet hair comes in. I created this piece from my cat's hair, Mo and Lou, and I gathered it as I petted them and then felted it using detergent under hot water and just rolling it in my hands to create these sort of hairy beads, and then strung them on silver wire. And yeah, we used to have one of those knife holders. I don't know if anybody has seen these, but we had one of those knife holders that is in a wooden sort of block filled with these long plastic thin tubes, or rods, I guess you would say. They're not tubes. Anyway, you can stick knives into them in any direction, and we really liked it at first, and then we found that it was just kind of breaking down. So I took to my studio, and I used some of the rods to make these earrings. This is something I'm still puzzling over. I bought a whole bunch of plastic letters at Goodwill, and my idea is to create poems using letters and to create jewelry from that poetry. So this, right now, this is spelling out forgotten, and it's part of a larger poem that I've been writing. And I like this form a lot. However, I am not having any luck gluing these pieces together. Even super glue isn't working, so I'll be experimenting further with that. In the meantime, though, I took some of the letters and I made wax models and then had them cast in silver. And I'm going to make myself 2 monogram rings to wear for my initials. I also bought 2 huge bags of silk rose petals at Salvation Army. And I had this vintage collar from when I was working on the Exquisite Balance project. I had bought a vintage iron, and silly me, instead of trying it out in something less precious, I tried to iron this beautiful collar and I burned it. It literally caught on fire. So I put it aside because I didn't want to throw it out. And then I ended up making this soon after Russia invaded Ukraine. I was thinking about shields and scars, and I wondered what a shield of rose petals would signify. I talked earlier that I use recycled silver whenever I can, but I'm hoping to make myself more educated about that in the near future. You can buy scrap silver and gold in Winnipeg as well as coins, but you can't do much with them unless you have the right tools to transform them into silver sheet or wire. I purchased this rolling mill recently, and I plan to purchase tools which will enable me to melt the scrap metal, make ingots, and then use the rolling mill to create sheet silver and gold when I can afford it. I'd love to use gold. It's a beautiful material to work with, but it's very expensive. Just taking a sip of tea, excuse me. I want to show you the work here of another artist, Hebi Argentieri. I really love this piece. I wrote an article about narrative jewelry for MAWA recently, and this is an excerpt from the article I wrote. The materials used by Argentieri conceptually echo the content of her work, which investigates transformation and political and environmental crises. Her necklace, made from discarded plastic, paper, and silver, materially reflects the impact of the military coup in her country of Argentina, where the dictatorship controlled information about massive human rights violations. She wrote, 30,000 people were abducted, tortured, and killed during this time. Among them, many writers and journalists who tried to inform and alert the people about what was going on. My necklace voices includes the names of all these journalists and writers. Another artist that I've become totally enamored with is Nico Williams. He is an Anishinaabe artist located in Montreal, and his work completely fascinates me. In his case, he finds items on the street and then he replicates them in beading. Excuse me. He is basically beading remnants or refuse and using indigenous color schemes to do so. The text written by a gallery where Williams recently had a show includes this. Nico Williams draws parallels between traditional indigenous basketry and found objects, beading in plastic and glass, the disposable vessels of our consumer age. I find it's really remarkable work. And if there are any curators out there, please bring his work to Winnipeg. I just saw this week that he was longlisted for the Sobey Award, so that's really fantastic. And this piece just blows my mind. The Dirty J cloth, that is a completely beaded piece. And this, I just found the store this week on Goulet in St. Boniface. They sell used clothing by weight and also have a little line of their own clothes made by the woman there told me, one of their employees. His name is Lou, and he goes under the name of Flower Pots by Lou. He makes these clothes out of thrifted clothes. I tried to try this vest on. It did not fit me, and I was very sad because I think it's really spectacular. But what I love is that he articulates on each label what the materials cost and what his labor costs. So smart. Like, it's so great to outline that for people. We might be using waste materials that are free or very cheap, but it still takes a lot of time and effort to transform them into something new. And I love that he's kind of just being really open and honest about that. Why does this vest cost $127? Well, it took him a heck of a long time to put it together. Another project I'm at work on is to do a jewelry map of Riding Mountain National Park. I was very fortunate to participate in an artist residency in Deep Bay in Riding Mountain last summer through the Manitoba Arts Council. And while I was there, I walked the shore every morning and every evening looking for items to use in my work. But because it's a national park, you can't actually remove items. So I took with me some silicone molding material. And when I found items, I would return to the cabin, prepare the molding material, and would press the items into it. This is a really fantastic way to take home with me what I found, but not the literal thing. That meant that I could return the items to the shore or the woods or wherever I found them. I didn't think to bring any wax with me, but there were some candle stubs at the cabin, and so I melted some candle wax to see how that would work in the molds. It's not a very good picture here, but it is remarkable how much detail is picked up in those molds. Back in my studio, this is still at the cabin, but back in my studio, I poured resin into the molds, and the orange piece there in the middle is a resin positive from the mold. And then I poured wax, beeswax, or sometimes a harder kind of wax into the mold. And then I had one of the claws, the crab claws, cast in bronze, which is to the right there. And that is straight from the casting place. I haven't polished it yet. It's going to be a gleaming, beautiful sort of gold color, but that's how it looks when it comes out of the casting. Also, when I was at the cabin, I made this birch bark ring for another Craft Council Makers Challenge. It's temporary work, of course. I found the bark almost exactly as it looks here, wound sort of tightly. I wrapped it around my finger and I wore it for the day and took pictures. This here is a project I've been thinking about for a few years, and I'm just really starting it. I found several of these personalized boxes, and I plan to create worlds inside them and invent narratives for the names of the people that appear on the box. I found quite a few of them so far. Well, not that many. I'm looking for more. Again, if anybody ever sees anything, message me. I'll make little dioramas inside of little worlds, and at least one of the items will be a piece of jewelry. The title Worlds Inside, the title Worlds Inside There, whatever I said earlier, comes from a conversation with my young grandnieces, actually. I was showing them the work of Wanda Coop, and particularly these large head landscape paintings. And one of them said, "Wow, there are worlds inside there." That sounded so profound to me and so poetic. I wrote it down and I thought someday that will be the title of a work. So thank you for being here. I am very appreciative to Katrina and everyone at C2 Center for Craft for the great work that you do. I'm also so grateful to the Winnipeg Arts Council, the Manitoba Arts Council, and the Canada Council for the Arts for the support they've given me in the last few years. We are very fortunate in Winnipeg to have access to these three funding bodies who care about artists and the work that they do. So thank you for listening.
That was such a great talk, Tricia. If anyone has questions for Tricia, they can enter them into the chat, which if you're on a phone is below, and if you're on like a computer, it would be on the right side. And I'll ask you a few while we wait because there's a little delay for people entering their questions. Okay. So a lot of your reclaimed materials come from people and places that you hold really close to your heart, which was a thing I noticed during your talk. Do you think that the materials influence the content of your work, or that the content of your work kind of lends to these materials, or like both, I guess?
I think it's a real back and forth thing. Yeah, I'm a real sucker for a bit of nostalgia. I mean, I have to say, I've also purchased several abandoned sewing kits at Goodwill, just because, I look at them and think, oh, somebody was working away and then they died or moved, and here's their projects all in this little tin box, and I just scoop them up and want to love them all over again.
There's so much like energy that goes into those projects. I kind of get that same pang like when I see a grandma sewing stuff and there's like all of her half-finished projects donated by someone. There's like all of this like labor and time and effort and sort of like a life that has gone into these things, and then to see them at Value Village feels so odd. Yeah.
And I have to say, one of my favorite things that's in my studio right now, I got it the MCC store in Brandon, and it's a half-done needlepoint of a boxer dog, and it's like the head and two legs, and the needle is still sticking out, and the thread is still coming down. And I was with my my partner's mom, Agnetha Dick, and it was 25 cents, but it was on sale for half price. So I took it over to Agnetha and I said, I think I just found the best thing in this entire store. And she looked at it and went, yes, you did. And then I took it up to the till and they were like, I guess it's 12 and a half cents.
We have some comments. Chris Harris says, great to see your work. Super interesting. Tricia Brock says, thank you, Tricia. Very inspiring talk and beautiful work. And I have one more question for you. So you have like a real eye for finding beauty in these everyday objects. Like the anti-static bag necklace comes to mind. Like it's so beautiful. I would never have known that that was what that was made of if you hadn't told me. Do you find that working with these materials has helped enhance your creativity? Because there's a sort of like eye and looking for these materials that you're using that I think a lot of us aren't necessarily thinking about when we're picking up like packing peanuts and like, you know, plastic from the outside of our packaging.
For sure. And what I find too that I mean I've always been a collector of stuff, mostly junky stuff. I'm not a collector of fine things very much, but I really like vintage jewelry a lot, and I've been collecting that since I was a little kid because my sister Carol had a good friend who was an antique, sort of a part-time antique jewelry collector and dealer. And so she would have these parties at her apartment, and I was like 11 or something, and I was buying all these like really amazing brooches with like they were just weird. And so I really early on came to really love that kind of strangeness. And
Mm-hmm.
what I also love, you know, to get back to your question, is I find that when you find materials like this, it's it's almost you can't do anything but make something unique because the piece itself is unique.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not churning out something, you know, 1,000 of something. You're maybe making one or two or three of them, and it forces you to kind of, in a way, be limited, and in a way to really expand at the same time. It's a interesting back and forth.
Because there's this, because I mean, working with beautiful materials makes it easy to make, not easy, of course, but like it gives a lot of space to make something beautiful. When I was in university, they started discouraging us as we got into later years to not work with silk in our dye studios because, like, the joke is like you can dye a piece of silk puke green and it looks beautiful because it's silk. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I feel like your materials kind of have that idea in them. It's like, okay, well, of course, gold is beautiful, but like, how do we make like a little thing you found on a shrub beautiful? How do you make, you know, you name it beautiful, a seed? How do you make, and it's really like elevating these materials to this place of, especially jewelry, right? Jewelry we think of as being this sort of like this like beautiful adornment you're adding on top, and I think that there's this really beautiful sensibility in making these everyday materials jewelry, you know. I really enjoy it, and I think it's really interesting. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate hearing that because I think that's part of what I'm playing with too. Like I don't set out to make my work funny, but I think it ends up being kind of funny a lot of the times because of the materials I'm using, and it's kind of like a bit goofy sometimes, I think. And I kind of love that um, this idea of knocking jewelry down from a pedestal of just being for the rich or just being for special occasions to being something you can just really play around with, and doesn't even have to be always something that lasts forever.
Yeah, you're really subverting the idea of like what jewelry is, you know. uh Abby Ald says, thank you for your talk. My mind is buzzing. Could you talk a bit more about the genre narrative jewelry, if that's what that is? A new term to me. So like talk a bit more about narrative jewelry.
So that was Abby.
Mhm.
Thanks, Abby. Hi, Abby. Um, well, the idea of narrative jewelry is this idea of using jewelry as a way to tell stories. Sorry, I, my, I'm getting texts. I guess I should. I don't
If
know.
you turn down your computer volume, that should help with that.
Okay, I'll turn down my computer volume. Will that not affect my voice?
You should be fine.
Okay.
It's a different system.
Okay. Sorry about that.
No
Binging.
worries.
Yeah, so narrative jewelry it's pretty fascinating area, and I guess some people call it conceptual jewelry as well. But it's this idea of using jewelry as a way to tell stories and as opposed to just being adornment, which is totally great too. Um, Jewelry should be fun, it should be worn, but there's also, like with the Argentieri piece that I showed you about the military coup in Argentina and the piece that she made in response to that. Um, you could wear that piece and no one would know that that's what it was about. They would just think it was a really um, lovely and unusual piece. Um, but knowing the story, it's like you're carrying history around with you. It's like you're carrying some sort of even activism around with you, and I love that it's almost a bit hidden as
Mhm,
well.
mhm. Um, I'm thinking back to that piece you made for Lens Reflex. The name of the piece is leaving me, but it's that jewelry piece that about your parent or your grandparents'
Oh
farm.
yeah, Township
Uh,
13. Yeah,
yes, Township 13. I knew it was I was like, it's not Lot 13. It's something like that. It's like on the tip of my tongue. Um, and I feel like that's a really great example, for me at least, of your jewelry being narrative, because you're sort of
yeah,
telling this story about this place and this time through all of these pieces of jewelry that fit into this box. So separately, they look like jewelry, but then when they all come together, suddenly you're getting this really beautiful story that's being built within this like custom made jewelry box. I felt like that was a really lovely example of narrative jewelry that you've done, for me at least.
yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, yeah. It's right. Like, and I like using maps and diagrams a lot because I find that they are also one of these things that tells a lot of stories. Some of them are not true, and some of them are contested, and I find that whole thing really interesting.
Hmm.
Um, and also, this idea like the bird habitat loss, the circles. Just these very simple circles could represent anything, but they actually talk about this massive decline in bird population.
Hmm.
And again, you have to know the story to know what the pendant is about, but even if you don't know the story, it's still kind of a nice thing to wear.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the fun thing about your jewelry, and what I think really makes it great craft is that it has all of these layers to it, but then also it just looks great. It's like you're wearing a necklace made out of anti-static bags, but it also just looks like a really glamorous piece of like costume jewelry at the same time. There's not that sort of like you have to read the artist statement to get why this is a necklace. Is just also a very interesting necklace that you could wear to a party and people would be like, cool necklace, what's that made out of? You know? And I think that's a really like fun mix of like your ideas and then also the craft aspect as well, like being able to like bring that all together. Anyway, thank you so much, Tricia, for giving us this great talk and for spending your Thursday evening with us.
Thank you. It was super fun, and I really appreciate being part of this.
Of course. And have a great night to everybody else out there.
Okay.